Our next session deals with some very interesting life cases. Chairing the next session will be Dr. Robin Chakraborty, Dr. Paja, and Dr. Amol Khan. Moderating this session will be Dr. Devdatta Bhattacharya, and our experts panelists include Dr. Shumanta Chatterjee, Dr. Lipika Adhikari, and Dr. Devopriya Mondal. May I please request the chairperson and the moderator, Dr. Devdatta Bhattacharya, to start the proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you, Navnil. We have in our midst Dr. Maja. So I would like to ask Sir to take over the proceedings. So there is a live in box case where I am one of the operators. So Dr. Paja, if you will.
Yes, thank you very much. That is the very important case will be started now. So you can go ahead. Start it. Dr. Robin, Dr. Chakraborty with me. Okay, please.
Robin Chakraborty has not joined, I think.
Okay. So you can start the case.
Okay, I think the IT from backend start playing the live in box case. So it is a case of calcified LED, which we had done. Dr. Bhattacharya was the main operator in that case. Sir will be also there in the discussion.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Dr. Sunandan Sikdar, consultant interventional cardiologist, Narayana Multispeciality Hospital, Jessore Road. Today we have an interesting session about rota and IVUS in a calcified LED lesion. We have in our team none other than Dr. Devdatta Bhattacharya, who is the cath lab in charge of R.N. Tagore Hospital and who has been a very reputed interventionalist as far as IVUS and rota is concerned, and he has a vast experience in this field. We also have, apart from me, Dr. R.N. Karmakar, who is also an interventional cardiologist in this hospital.
Hello, this is Dr. R.N. Karmakar, interventional cardiologist at Narayana Multispeciality Hospital, Jessore Road, Kolkata. This is the story of a 75-year-old lady, hypertensive, who had an myocardial infarction about 5 years back, for which she was thrombolized and kept on medical management for unwillingness to go for intervention at that moment. For the last 5 to 6 months, she was having some angina, and for the last 2 or 3 months, she is having class 3 angina on optimal medical therapy. Her ECG shows loss of R wave in V1 to V3. Echo shows fair ejection fraction of about 50% with wall motion abnormality in the LED territory with a preserved muscle mass. On angiogram, it was found that the proximal LED was severely calcific with tram-track appearance, with moderate disease in the circumflex and RC.
So that is a good question. A lot of people try to avoid rota because it involves a lot of hardware and it has a learning curve and all that. But what we have seen in this type of lesion, where you have this tram-track type of very tight calcification and your imaging catheter won't go, in those cases you can't pass the IVL balloon. It will be impossible to pass the IVL balloon. And the cutting balloon also, although it is a very useful device, you have to deliver the cutting balloon across the lesion, and very difficult to deliver the cutting balloon also across this type of lesion. So what we have done here is we cross the lesions. I am cutting for the steps a little bit, and you can see this dot here. So this is the microcatheter, and we have taken the wire out, and after that we will pass a rota wire. So that is the rota wire going down there, and after that we take the microcatheter out and we begin rota ablation. So regarding rotablation, if you have questions, then we can discuss them before going forward. And also there was an interesting phenomenon that happened. Maybe you would like to tell the doctors about it. So at the beginning.
So at the beginning we had a big hitch because this patient who was in sinusitis till now, suddenly on engagement of the catheter developed atrial flutter, and with the fast ventricular rate such that she had started having angina on table, and her BP also dropped to 100 systolic, which was previously around 170. So at this point of time we had to halt the procedure for some time, and we had to give different drugs, among which Codron and adenosine were the two of them. After adenosine, she had a rate control and her rate came down. By this time, the Codron had its effect, and so we had more or less hemodynamically stable condition on which we could have started working. Dr. Bhattacharya, I would also like to ask you that is there any time when you pass the rotawire directly instead of using a microcatheter?
Yeah, only if you can't pass the microcatheter at all, or if your microcatheter is stuck at some point of the calcific stenosis, you can put the microcatheter there, and then you can try to negotiate out your rotawire through the microcatheter. Some people have used over-the-wire balloon in such cases where they have inflated the balloon and then they have tried to pass the wire over it. Passing rotawire over a long segment calcific lesion from here to here, as we can see in this case, is not easy because this lesion also has a lot of branches. And the rotawire is a very delicate type of wire, which is not as steerable as the usual guide wires that we are so used to. And you also have to be careful that you don't kink the rotawire while you are trying to do this. So these are the few disadvantages of trying to cross it directly with the rotawire. However, those who are very experienced, they can do it. It is possible to do it, but preferably this is the better method for those of interventionists who are starting out with doing rotablation. So there was one other thing, Shanandan, that we should discuss, that when that happened, someone who has had an MI who has LVEF of 40% on the table develops atrial flutter and the rate was quite high. We wanted to check the LVEDP. So we put a catheter in the left ventricle and the LVEDP was 8. So if the LVEDP is very high before you start rotablation, then don't do rotablation, because the microparticles that you generate during rotablation, they need to get washed away, and there is a high risk of slow flow, no flow, stagnation if the LVEDP is high. So you have to treat it first, get the LVEDP down, and then only we should proceed for rotablation. But fortunately in this case the LVEDP was quite 1.5 mm bar. So I'll stop here, and Shanandan, maybe you can take the discussion forward about what we did next.
Dr. Bhattacharya, Dr. Panja here.
I would like to ask Dr. Bhattacharya about whether you have any particular choice of bar in this case, and in which case you would like to have a bigger bar rather than 1.5 bar.
If in this case my choice of bar would be a 1.5, because what you want to do is to make an adequate amount of calcium modification. The other alternative is to start with a 1.25 bar, but I was quite sure that if I used a 1.25 bar, the calcium modification will not be adequate, and then I'll have to work further on it by other means, and maybe even upgrade to 1.5. So what you have to be careful about the 1.5 bar or a bigger bar like 1.75 bar is that in this type of lesion you should start burring and do pecking movements and be patient and go slowly, because you do not want to go in rapidly, generate large particles and cause heating up of the artery, and that inevitably leads to complications and problems. The other important thing is where you want to park the bar before you start burring. So here we are trying to show you there. So you can see that the lesion starts here, and you want to park the bird a little proximal to it. And the other thing is that the bird jumps when you activate the bird. So you have to just take the tension off this the catheter, the rotor catheter a little bit before you change it, and that you have to make sure that as you start budding it doesn't jump into that calcified segment, because sometimes if that happens then you can land up in problems. So we found a nice position for the bird here. We thought this was quite nice, and there was also this distance and there is no tension in the catheter, and this is where we started budding at a speed of 180,000 RPM. So Shunandan, I will hand over the mic to you. So
another thing is, interesting thing is that this bar initially, when it was being delivered, it was very difficult to deliver. But once we started burying it and we reached the distal part, it was very smooth, and there was no resistance. So this also proves that because of the atherectomy, a lot of plaque has been modified and the bar could go down. One thing I learned from Dr. Bhattacharya is about the preparation of the solution. So in this ROTA session, we had a solution which had only 2,500 units of heparin. We didn't use much of Dilzem or this GTM. Is there any trick or any of your secrets about this solution?
yeah, I think when in earlier days the cocktail contained the two other drugs that you just mentioned, which is nitrates and Dilzem, but we have moved away from that because we have observed that this can cause hypotension, which you really don't want. You want a good pressure head for the particles to be washed away. And the heparin also, we are adequately heparinizing the patient. So really what you want is a flush that takes the particles downstream so that the particles do not get clogged in the artery itself. We just added 2,500 ml of heparin, units of heparin to 500 ml of normal saline, and we were quite happy with that. And as you can see, that during the procedure we did not have any problems at all. Now, what I want you to see, there is a good aspect about this case is that when you see a case like this, it is a straight segment. Although it is very long, you can see the trunk calcification here. Up to here it is straight. Only here there is a bend here. And so we should concentrate. What we did was we concentrated on getting this segment right, and only after we were happy about this did we take it around this bend in the LAD. So over to you, Shunandan.
Then after this we had ballooned this segment, and initially we found that the distal lesion in the LAD beyond the mid LAD, that was also a difficult lesion to crack, and our balloon was not expanding and we had to go to a higher pressure. But as Dr. Bhattacharya really pointed out, so our target of modification was the initial plaque, the first part of the proximal part. We didn't want to modify below because there is higher chances of complication in the lower part, and that worked. And with the balloon in high pressure, we could have modified the plaque below also. Another thing I would like to know from you, if there is slow flow, what is the what are the steps that you take after ROTA if you have a slow flow?
Yeah, if you have slow flow and your pressure suddenly plummets, the thing to do is to get the pressure up, because if the pressure head comes up, usually that get rid of the slow flow. So I keep 1 in 20 ad ready as a standby, and if there is a sudden drop in pressure, I inject it intracoronary, and usually that works. Going back to the ROTA process, so you can see that we have positioned our bird here, and I will show you there. So this was after a few runs, and you can see that after we had modified the proximal straight segment, it goes in quite nicely to the distal straight to the distal across the bend. Now what Shunandan was saying was that lesion here, which is like 40-50%, and rota actually, even if you pass the bar across here, this will not modify it. It will modify this very tight bit, because here the lumen is 2.0 plus, so 1.5 bar will do nothing. So I actually didn't want the stent to come down here, but after we had done some ballooning here, it was a collective decision that this part would look ugly if we didn't stent it, and we decided ultimately to stent it. And I will show you as we go forward how we did it. So this is a 3 millimeter stent, 3x28, and we deployed, this is 6 atmospheres only, because we don't want to expand the distal end too much. And as you can see that it is quite well deployed here, not so well deployed higher up. So what we do is we pull the balloon back after this a little bit, like that, and then we inflate the balloon to higher pressures at 14 to 16 atmospheres. And
So after putting the first stent, we decided to pull back the stent balloon and pre-dilate the proximal part of LAD. And because there was diffuse disease in that part, we decided that second stent had to be implanted till the osseum. So what were the special precautions and special tricks that we would employ in such a case for osteal stenting? I would like Dr. Bhattacharya to elaborate.
yeah, well, thank you, Shunandan. So what we did, as you correctly said, that we deployed the first stent, and then we pulled the balloon back after deploying the first stent to the region where we wanted to deploy the second stent, that is more proximally, and we did a dilatation at 12 atmospheres. So this is a 3 millimeter stent, so we dilated it at 12 atmospheres, prepared the bed, and I'm going to show you how this was done and how we positioned our second stent. So as you described, we have, so this is the first stent here, and we have pulled the balloon back into the proximal LAD, and we have inflated it, and that is bed preparation, and this is how it looks after we have done the inflation. So now we are going to cover this region. So always when we are going to cover the ostium, we are going to take a view that delineates the ostium of the LAD with relation to the circumflex ostium very well. So this view was quite suitable in this case. Sometimes we have to go to extreme eleocaudal views to get a good view. And we had to be careful here because, as you can see, that there was a stenosis in the proximal circumflex, which we had decided to do at a later date. So we should be very careful in positioning our stent here. And this is a good landing zone so that we do not have much trouble when we are going to do the circumflex stenting. So as you can see, this is a nice position, and there is a little bit of overlap between the first and the second stent. And so this is another view. So this is the eleocaudal view. Here you can see that we are clear of the circumflex ostium, and the dot of the stent is just inside the distal part of the left main. So the stent would be covering the ostium. Fortunately, not too much osteal disease, but the disease is a little after that. And we deploy this stent, and little bit of overlap. And what we do after that is we take a 3 millimeter balloon and do post dilatation and optimization of the distal stent first. And after that, what we are going to do is we are going to take a bigger caliber balloon. Mind you, this is quite a smallish lady, and we have seen from our IVAS run that the proximal LAD is 3.5. So what we will do now is we'll do the final optimization. So this is a 3.5 millimeter balloon, and we are going to inflate it at 12 atmospheres initially, and then we went up to 14 to 16 atmospheres. And this is our final result. So I will stop here, and maybe Shunandan, you can take the discussion forward. Any more questions, and what we did finally, we will discuss after that.
So we definitely have a very good result angiographically here. But definitely in today's date, angiography is not the full answer to imaging issue. We would like to have a better image from IVUS, and so we decided to go ahead with an IVUS. And in IVUS, we would like to have the pictures related to the deployment of the stent and how well deployed it is. So I think Dr. Bhattacharya will show us the IVUS images, along with them the angiographic pictures that we have.
So you're absolutely right, Shunandan. This is a calcified lesion, and we wanted to do intravascular imaging to guide our intervention. As we know that in calcified lesions there is always a lot of pitfalls if we are not fully prepared with what is the anatomy of the inside of the vessel. We did see trunk tract calcification, but trunk tract calcification on angiography by itself is not foolproof, and it cannot guide your intervention, especially in these complex cases. So when we started, you saw that we could not pass the IVUS catheter at all across that very tight calcified lesion, and so we decided to do rotablation first. Now this is what it looked after rotablation. So I'm going to show you some IVUS cuts of the vessel after rotablation. So this is the proximal landing zone. There is a little bit of disease there, a little bit of calcium, but it's a reasonable landing zone there. Then this is the proximal LAD beyond the proximal landing zone. Again, this has a little bit of atheroma, but it is quite okay. And these are the two cuts of the places where the rota has worked. So you can see that there are cuts here beyond at the calcium, and now you can see beyond the calcium, because the calcium has been modified, and here you can see another cut here by the rota burr, and you can see beyond the vessel. And this is very helpful because this tells you now that when you do balloon dilatation after a result like this, then the balloon is going to expand, which we found in our case, which we showed earlier. So once you're happy about the balloon inflation, then you can go ahead and do your stenting. So this is what happened post stenting, and as we have already shown, and these are the corresponding cuts. So you can see this is 9.63 now, which is very acceptable. This is proximal LAD again, similar diameter, and this is the one region that we had a little concern about, this 40% stenosis distally, and still it is 5.23, which is reasonable. And then we took a measurement of the distal landing zone as well, and this was 6.2. So this is a good demonstration of how we can use rota to make absolutely sure that we have achieved good expansion of the stent. And not only that, it also tells you that once you have done the rotablation, how successful the rotablation has been, and that in itself gives you confidence to do pre-dilatation, stenting, post-dilatation safely. That is most important. If you have not abraded the calcium, then a lot of under expansion can happen in the stent, and while trying to do post-dilatation in these cases, you can have a lot of unpleasant complications like vessel rupture.
So we have here a very classic demonstration of what should be done in a calcified LAD. this is almost a textbook type of case, which we have a calcium inside the LAD with a long disease, and which has been subjected to initially IVUS and ROTA followed by post-stent IVUS, and we have seen that how the ROTA helps in helping the stent to expand to its ideal requirements, and we have seen how it can be done very safely. So thank you for all your attention, and we are open to questions, whatever may be coming up in your mind related to this case. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Dr. Bhattacharya is very excellent case and demonstrated the teaching purpose, just like a PCR. Padajat just to describe that type of learning point. So what I understood, this patient 5 years before there is a marking box, and therefore acute event reverted to chronic coronary syndrome in the meantime. So then patient stable and again you're getting pain, and therefore geographically definitely proximality long lesion and calcified lesion. You rightly manage the situation with some extraordinary technique. So therefore initially you have tried the rotor 1.25, that lead to some disaster, that is no flow phenomena leading to atrial fibrillations. No, so it may happen. This is one of the complication of the rotor even in the low bar 1.25. So it is nicely managed by the amiodarone, and again you have tried to with higher bar 1.5 and successfully enough room is available in the proximal part, and you are pre-dilated by the NC balloon, ultimately giving the 2 stent. Why my question, doctor, why not give a single stent? I think the diameter of the thing, Dr. Bhattacharya,
Yes,
why not
yes.
single stent
I think,
strategy?
yes, I'll answer that question, sir. No, before that, we just used the 1.25, we just used a 1.5 bar. We did not use a 1.25 bar. What we were trying to say was that the beginning of the case, before we had done anything at all, just on engaging the left coronary artery, the patient suddenly developed some uneasiness, and we found that the patient had developed atrial flutter. The heart rate went up to 160, and the blood pressure plummeted to just below 100. And we were worried because we did not want to do rotablation with a blood pressure and pulse like this. So we gave Cordarone, and what the Cordarone did was it did not convert it, but it slowed the heart rate down. So it was from 150, the heart rate during the procedure was around roughly 80 to 90, and we did check the LVEDP, which is very important. If the LVEDP had shot up to 30 or 40, then that would be an indication for us to stop and give diuretics, get the LVEDP down. But this was not that in this case, and after the heart rate was controlled, we could proceed. Regarding your question, why didn't we use one stent? We did not, because we did not have that 48 millimeter stent on the ward, in the cath lab. That is the sole reason, and I accept that if you could take a 48, probably you could have covered it and got away without that stent overlap.
What is the reason you want to mention that is on merely placing of the guide catheter causing all the hemodynamic instability? What is mechanism?
I think it was probably not related to us placing the guide catheter. It just had to happen. Probably the patient was anxious, and maybe there was an ectopic or two that triggered this arrhythmia. I'm not sure why it happened. And it is one of these things, it can happen. You can take a patient up for pacing with sick sinus syndrome, and just when you take the patient on the table, the patient develops atrial fibrillation, and that causes a lot of heartburn. But in this case, this was more serious. We were very worried because she was a very frail lady, weight under 50 kgs, and we had to be very careful. These ladies are very, very prone to various complications, so we were worried. But fortunately, within half an hour, the rate was under control, and we could proceed.
I think one of the important cause you have to keep in mind, air embolism. It may happen merely pressing the guiding catheter. It certainly happen. Don't forget that to exclude the air embolism, we may be responsible for that. That is one possibility you have to keep in mind. But benefit of doubt, you give some autoperfusion. That means fluid at least 30 to 40 cc then randomly if you give it, it should be corrected also. You have to keep in mind for air embolism.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Of course, air embolism can happen with the first injection. But I think in this case, we were sure that that was not the case. It was not air embolism. We didn't see any.
No, yeah. Okay. And second thing, rightly manage why you not use the cutting balloon when the rotor is getting problem, and cutting balloon is very useful alternative, no doubt at all.
The cutting balloon would not have passed this calcific blockage.
Okay.
So we started with trying to pass a IVUS catheter, and we couldn't show you that those things. The IVUS catheter wouldn't go across the proximal LAD. So it was backing off at the proximal LAD. And usually this is a good enough indication to start doing rotablation. Because if you cannot pass your IVUS catheter, then if you start to do ballooning, usually that results in complications. It dissects the vessel, but it doesn't actually get rid of the calcium. And once you have dissected a vessel, it becomes more difficult to do rotablation. You can still do it, but it becomes more difficult. And a cutting balloon, you would never be able to deliver the cutting balloon across this lesion.
Another question, as your rotor bar is not possible to cut the distal part of the calcium, in that cases. So one other possibility, if the patient feels no constraint, that case is definitely rotor followed by the IVL shock is very another alternative treatment. And that is what, but it is costly affair. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I think the question probably is regarding the distal lesion, because the proximal lesion we are very happy about. The distal lesion, I knew that the 1.5 bar would not modify the distal plaque because it is a 40% lesion, and it the IVUS showed that there was a little bit of calcium in it. I tend to avoid these lesions. I don't think it would have been made much of a difference if we did not go across that bend of that LAD. But we did it because it was a collective decision, and as I anticipated, there were problems with expansion of just that part of the stent. And yes, if you have IVL, it works better on these type of lesions. But remember that it is a costly device, and it should not be used lightly. You should use patients that are going to benefit. And this is a mid-LAD 40% lesion is not that significant clinically.
Another important that is we could have used the OPN balloon. You see, that is including proximal to the distal lesion, that you can do the high pressure. OPN balloon is very effective in that situation.
I accept that. Yes, that is a good point. We can use OPN balloon. But as you saw that in this case, after the rotablation was done, the area of interest where there was the tightest calcium, there you need to look at how your 3 millimeter balloon is expanding. Does it have a waist? Does it have under expansion in some segment? So there are two things can happen. One is that the 3 millimeter balloon does not expand. You have a clear cut waist. That is indication for upsizing your bar. If that doesn't happen, something else can happen, is that the balloon as a whole, if you have a long tubular lesion, the balloon as a whole can be, so it is not 3 millimeter. It is like you are using a 3 millimeter balloon, but most of the part it is looking like 2.5. That also means that your bed preparation is not right. You can say this without doing intravascular ultrasound. And in those cases where non-compliant balloon won't go up to more than 24 atmospheres, there you could take OPN balloon, especially after you have modified the calcium. Do not try this before you have modified the calcium, because you can rupture the vessel. It is not advisable to do before calcium modification, only after the calcium modification. Yes, I accept where a conventional non-compliant balloon wouldn't work. You could take a OPN balloon.
A post-dilation NC balloon.
Go to the next session, sir.
Oh, you're already over. Okay, thank you very much. It's very good teaching session for all the fellows and the trainee. Everyone else will highly benefit for this patient. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Complete.
Congratulations to Dr. Devdutt and their team. Okay.
Next question is by Dr. Harsh Mehta. His birthday is today, so we will wish him a happy birthday before we start the session.
Okay.
Dr. Harsh Mehta about trick valve. Dr. Harsh Mehta, are you there, sir? Dr. Harsh Mehta, are you there?
He's coming.
Dr. Harsh Mehta, please unmute yourself. Sir, unmute yourself.
Dr. Shikdar, he will present the interesting case now, perhaps? I don't know.
He will present a trick valve.
Oh, trick.
Technique
Okay.
of putting trick valve here.
Okay. For half an hour, within half an hour or 20 minutes?
Yes, half an hour.
Hi, how are you, sir?
Oh, fine.
Okay.
Mehta, very nice meeting to you. Welcome. So
How
I
is it?
think, yeah, fine. Now, if you are audible, your slide.
Can you, yeah, I'll share my screen now.
Yes, screen. So we first today we are going to welcome you to the evening Calcutta, and I understood that you are happy birthday today.
Oh, thank you. How did you know?
Thank you very much. Just got the message from Sigdar.
Okay.
Welcome you for the
Thank you, sir.
family who could have, you will enjoy the family today evening. In spite of that, you are joining with us.
No problem, sir.
Okay,
Pleasure.
Yeah,
Pleasure.
Horace, please.
So we'll go ahead.
Yes, go ahead, please.
So I think they've handed me both the talks because I think one of the speaker had COVID. So I'm going to run both of them together.
Yes, please do it.
Okay. So today we're talking about an important valve problem. You know, the structural heart disease is getting more and more importance. And they told me that we should speak about management of tricuspid regurg, which is, as we all know, it's a surgical graveyard many a times, and many a times surgeons leave the tricuspid valve alone. And we are faced with patients coming back with right heart failure, and we don't know what to do with them. So the valves are from the Vienna company. They have a bicable valve, which is used for the tricuspid position. So we know tricuspid regurg affects 1.6 million in USA. I'm sure the figure is going to be higher in India. The surgical mortality for this valve is about 9%. And multiple transcatheter devices have been developed for TR in high-risk patients like annuloplasty rings and everything. But they're still under the phase of being evolved and they are being studied. None of them have showed any superiority so far. So problem is whenever the tricuspid annulus dilates, or there are prior pacemaker leads in 11% of patients, we can think of using a cable valve implantation. We'll show you how it works and what are the benefits. The prognosis of tricuspid regurg, as I told you already, is very, very poor, and there's a rapid downhill course, and there's an impact on long-term survival, especially in patients with chronic heart failure and LV dysfunction. And if your effective ERO is more than 40 millimeters square, then the chance of survival goes down significantly. And this 5-year event rate is also significant as the TR increases. And if there is a combined underlying disease in the presence of TR, so if you have a congenital, organic, valvular, LV dysfunction, pulmonary hypertension, all these cases lead to increase in mortality. So the left-sided valve disease as well as atrial fibrillation and heart failure also worsens the outcomes in these patients. So these are the complex group of patients we have and where we definitely need a heart team decision for the treatment of TR. So you need to know the morphology, you need to know the cause of the TR, severity, the annulus size, how is the RV remodeling, the pulmonary vascular resistance. All this is very, very important because if you see mild TR, it progresses rapidly to severe TR. And if you don't operate, then you reach a point of no return. And then all you're left is a pharmacological therapy. And many of these patients do not get surgery. But some of them do improve and we feel they are doing well. But again, they start going down. So the important thing is to avoid reaching the point of no return. Because once we reach the point of no return, then we get into trouble. So what is this tri-cable bi-cable system? What is this trick valve called? And what are the indications for use? So it's a bi-cable in the sense there are two valves, one in the superior vena cava, one in the inferior vena cava. They are self-expanding bovine pericardium valves, and they are used for hemodynamically relevant TR and cable reflex. It is only meant for patients at extreme risk or who are inoperable for open surgical therapy. You implant these valves through the femoral root into the inferior and superior vena cava, and you do not disturb the native tricuspid valve. The important feature of this valve is that it remains in the vena cavas. You do not disturb the main valve. So this is how it looks. This is the SVC part, and this is the IVC part. That's a nitinol frame. There's a long skirt, and there is bovine pericardium, leaflet, and skirt. And this is the IVC. This is again the leaflets and skirt. There's a short skirt here, so that you do not extend too much down. Otherwise, you can occlude the hepatic vein, which can be troublesome. So this is a dry tissue technology which is used with dehydration and anti-calcific treatment. It's a ready-to-use preloaded valve. When I did this valve, it was coming separate. We had to load it, but now we have a preloaded valve. So the preparation time is slow, and the handling of valve is much easier, and the risk of contamination has gone down. This is how the valve looks here. If you can see the tri-leaflet valve, this is the view from top down, and this is the concept. So it avoids backflow basically. So that the backflow of the TR does not go into the venous circulation. So the liver is protected and the upper venous drainage is protected, which has shown to reduce symptoms and mortality. What's the protocol we follow? We need a CT angiogram that has to be followed. Then you have 3D MPR is used to transfer the images. We all know that we use this for TAVI like in Osiris or Horus, or you can use the Trementio. And the correct sizing of the valve is essential to reduce the risk of EVL and migration of the valve, because if the valve is smaller, it may migrate outwards. The sizes available are for the SVC is 25 and 29, and IVC is 31 and 35. And they have different diameters. The proximal diameter is different, the distal diameter is different, and the length of the valve is also different, which you can see on the right-hand side. And this is exactly the measurement you can see. So the SVC portion, where the SVC RA junction is there, that's the size that's counted, that's 25, and this is 29. And the top of the valve, which will sit above the confluence, is 20 millimeters. And the length after deployment becomes 66 in this and 69 in this. And this is similarly the IVC portion. So this is the portion which enters the RA, and this is the portion that remains in the IVC. So the measurement is based on this. So how do we measure this? So there are multiple things you have to measure. First, you have to measure the diameter of confluence, where your left brachycephalic joins. Then you have the pulmonary artery. So you measure the diameter at the top of the pulmonary artery. Then you measure the diameter at the middle of the pulmonary artery. So SVC at middle of the pulmonary artery. Then diameter at the level of bottom of the pulmonary artery. Then diameter at the SVC RA junction. Then length between the first and the third. That means length between diameter of confluence and diameter at the level of middle pulmonary artery. And finally, length between 1 and 5. And then it's very important that this diameter variation is to be kept in mind so that you know which valve to take. So you, between 2 and 3, between 3 and 4, you need to know the variation to adjust the size of the valve. And this calculation is done by this complex thing, but that's not to worry about. It's just something that the company decides based on these diameters, how to decide how much the SVC will dilate after you put this valve. They have to size the valve according to the expected dilatation of the SVC. How do we choose the SVC valve? So as I told you, this is the SVC portion. Now the important thing here is you have to see this, the confluence should be larger than 14. In a 25 SVC top PA, diameter has to be between 19 to 31. For a 29 has to be 22 to 34. SVC middle PA should be around this range, and for a 29 between 27 to 34. And the length at the level of middle PA should be larger than 35. Length to the SVC RA should be larger than 50 because your valve is 67. All this is very, very important to decide which valve you're going to take the size, because the valve should not slip. So the crown which you see here, and this belly anchors in the SVC. And there's a high skirt here to prevent the PVL. Similarly, for IVC, you have similar measurements which you take. So the IVC RA transition, IVC at the top of hepatic veins, IVC just below the hepatic veins, IVC at 5 centimeters from IVC RA transition, and IVC RA transition to top of hepatic vein length. So this is how it is. This is how you size. Again, same thing. You need to see the IVC RA junction. If it's between 24 to 31, you take a 31. If it's going to be 28 to 35, you take a 35. Similarly, IVC to top of hepatic vein, length of the IVC RA junction, and IVC below HV, the hepatic vein, and IVC 5 centimeter below RA junction. So this is very, very important. The other important thing is that here the skirt is small, because you don't want the skirt to go and block the hepatic vein, which will be around somewhere here. So this is how it looks. It's a SVC implanted, inferior implanted valve. The delivery is using a 28 French flexible catheter via the transvenous route. What other equipment we need? Actually, we don't need anything major. We just need 2 venous punctures. One is a big puncture from the femoral vein, and another jugular puncture to get your pigtail down. And you need to get pulmonary artery catheter across, so that you know where the pulmonary artery starts. That will give you an idea where to deploy the valve. So you may or may not use TE. It's not necessary to use TE when transthoracic is good. Fluoroscopy is absolutely mandatory. You need syringes. You need 2 6 French sheets. You need the standard guide wire. You need a super stiff guide wire to guide your valve in. You need dilators, pigtail, right heart balloon catheter as used for right heart cath. That's for the pulmonary artery. And of course, you may or may not use ProGlide. If you take a figure of 8 stitch, then you may not need a ProGlide. Vascular access is accessed as per hospital protocol. The primary access vein is used to introduce the valve and the delivery system. And the secondary access vein is introduced the reference pigtail. You generally don't need a temporary pacemaker on the venous side, because this is not a balloon implantable valve, so you don't generally need it. The sheath lead approach can be used by some operators. It's an operator discretion. And of course, you have to maintain the ACT about 250 seconds. So how do you select patients? So clinically, they have to be more than NYHA 3, EF less than 40, 6-meter walk distance less than 60, life expectancy should be between 12 months. There should be absence of untreated left side valvular heart disease. So we should not treat TR in a patient who's got an untreated left-sided MR or a mitral valve or an aortic disease. Severe renal failure, liver cirrhosis, child C. Hemodynamics, V wave in IVC and SVC more than 25, TAPC more than 15, 14. A very important thing is that they should not have severe pulmonary hypertension. Their systemic pulmonary pressure should be less than 65. So this is how it looks, and I'm going to show you a live case on how finally that valve is implanted. This I'm going to skip because I'm going to show you the whole thing, how it looks. So these are the different valves that are available for tricuspid now. You have direct suture annuloplasty, you have a direct ring annuloplasty, you have coaptation with mitral clip, which is used now in the tricuspid. So you can use a Pascal, and then you have annuloplasty like TriKinch, Mitralix. Lots of things are going on. And of course, valves are going on, valve replacements like Trizol, Navigate, TriCares, Tricento. So that this really work. So what you see here in a trial which is not yet published, the screening, there was NYHA class was 3 to 4. That comes down to 2 and 3, like 50, 37.5 and 12.5. So 4 moves down to 3 in 50% of patients. It moves down to 2 in 37.5% patients. And 3 remains at 3 in 50%, goes down to 2 in 37.5 and goes down to 1 in 12.5% patients. Similarly, the 6-minute walk distance increases from seeing to 6 months to 1 year, from 258 to 294. And then the overall well-being score moves from 36 to 66 over 1 year. The weight has shown to go down because the edema goes down, and the at 6 months the weight goes from 78 plus or minus 19 to 75 plus or minus 19. Of course, it's still a new procedure, so it's still evolving. We need more data. And TAPSE starts improving. The systolic pulmonary artery pressure starts going down. The right atrium area has shown to slightly go up, which is obvious because you're blocking the TR there. But there have been no consequences to that. And the ejection fraction probably remains the same, left side ejection fraction. And the RVD Mitchell goes down. The RVD mid-ventricular goes down, which you can clearly see here. And there's a pre-implant CT scan of a patient. And now see the post-implant CT scan. So the RA volume has shrunk from 73.1, 731.5 to 468. And you can clearly see that it's going down. 38% reduction in RA volume, almost 50% reduction in RV volume. So it does seem to work. The hemodynamics, the V waves in the SVC goes down, and the RA pressure obviously will go slightly up. It has no consequences because the IVC V wave goes significantly down, which I'll show you in the case we did, from 22 to 15. And Doppler backflow in hepatic veins, you can see from 0.85 plus or minus 0.3, it goes to 0.26. So there's a significant improvement in relief of symptoms. In the SVC pressure, you can see goes down from 18 to 15, RA from 18 to 17, IVC 21 to 12.8. So the maximum benefit is in the IVC. And there's the TRICUS 1 trial, which was done, which shows the weight going down from 78 to 69, the score picking up from 34 to 55, and 6-meter walk test increasing from 168 to 256. The 6-month follow-up, it's still an unpublished data. So there was no device-related mortality in these few patients that were done. There was one hematoma access site and one conversion to surgery. So in conclusion, trick valve is a new, promising and a less invasive concept for the treatment of TR. The successful and uneventful initial experience showed the feasibility of applying this new therapy in patients with severe TR. Trick valve assured with significant improvement in functional status, the quality of life, and hemodynamics at 6-month follow-up. The confirmation of these results in a large number of patients at longer follow-up may open a new avenue for the treatment of TR. So I'm going to end that theoretical talk at this point, and I will show you a case which we did 3 years back. This was a lady who was a star in Kuwait. She was a big TV star, and she came down to India and was admitted in a hospital there.
Just one moment, Dr. Mehta.
Sure.
Just can you organizers, can you mute the microphones of all the other people who are not supposed to speak? Please do that. There's a lot of disturbance. We are not being able to follow Dr. Mehta's speech.
Sir, only 3 of you guys are muted, sir. Harish Mehta, sir, Bhattacharya, sir, and Mantosh Panja, sir. That's all.
Okay.
I can hear the voice of a lady. Dr. Mantosh Panja has left. You can mute his mic. I can hear
done,
the
sir. Done.
Okay.
Now only Mehta, sir, and you only have.
Right. Yeah.
So this was an interesting lady who was denied any procedure. She had cryptogenic hepatic cirrhosis with a mild to moderate MR and severe TR, deranged LFTs, persistent right heart failure. So in Kuwait, the surgeons had written her off and told her there's nothing we can do for you. And she came here with hope whether we can do something for her. And here we studied her and we realized that she doesn't have severe pulmonary hypertension. And we had a chat with lots of colleague cardiologists in India and also abroad. And then after a lot of discussion, we offered her this therapy where it was compassionate use. That time it was not allowed to be imported. We use a compassionate use tricuspid valve and told her that she may or may not benefit from it or may even succumb. But she took that risk and then we took her up. She was 64-year-old. If we did a diagnostic right heart cath to rule out pulmonary hypertension, that's mandatory. You should never take a patient who's got severe pulmonary hypertension. We took a bilateral femoral venous access. We took a right radial access. That's just to keep the pressure monitoring. Right IJV was taken for putting the pigtail. Heparin was used for ACT. And the valve was stripped onto delivery system and placed under fluoroscopic guidance. And of course, we did not use any ProGlide. We just used a Z suture. This is how it's done. This is your pulmonary artery catheter here. Can you see that? That's the catheter which goes from the right side of the pulmonary artery. This catheter that goes into the confluence, and that's that's the pacemaker lead they had, previous pacemaker implanted. And this is your SVC, your pigtail shot for you to know how you have to place it here. And this is how we start placing it. The important thing is that the main valve has to be below the confluence. That is, the pulmonary artery catheter helps you to decide where the skirt will end. So the skirt, if you see the design of the valve, the skirt ends here and the anatomy changes here. So you have to keep this portion of the skirt below this pulmonary artery catheter. So you're very clearly away from the confluence. Once you're convinced that you're in the right position, you open this valve slowly. Once you again confirmed, you can see the confluence is way higher.
Dr. Mehta, just tell us about. Can you hear?
Yeah, I can hear you, sir.
Yeah, just tell us about what you said about the pulmonary artery catheter.
Yeah, so the pulmonary artery catheter, you have to have the skirt portion below that. This is the skirt portion.
The tip of the catheter is the pulmonary artery.
Yeah, that's the pulmonary artery.
So it is in the right pulmonary artery.
You can put in right or generally it has to go to the right.
Right. Yes. So
you have to be above that. The skirt has to be below that. So that's very important.
It is before any major bifurcation, right?
Yes. Because the confluence is higher, which you can see very well.
No, I mean the pulmonary artery catheter is the tip is before the pulmonary artery trifurcates or bifurcates.
Yes.
And it has to be below that. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. And then once you're convinced that you're going in the right position, then you start releasing the valve like any other self-expanding valve. And you see that this is the bulbous portion that holds it into the SVC. So this bulbous portion prevents the valve from slipping out. And that's why I told you to measure those diameters to know that this is the right size for that case.
So if it slips, it comes down or it goes up?
It can come down. It will not go up because up is impossible.
That's right.
It will go down. Yeah. And then it will be a surgical disaster then.
Sir, your time is up. Please try to close.
Yeah, you're almost finished.
Okay,
this is your hepatic vein. And you can again see the skirt is above the hepatic vein.
Yes.
And then you deploy it. And then this is how it is. This is how it looks. And it has no effect on the pacing wire. It makes no difference. And you see this beautiful wave. Can you see the V wave that was there in the HVC has now gone away?
Yes.
In the IVC, sorry. So that clearly shows that this valve has started working. And the best part is that in a week, her varices regressed. And the creat went from 1.7 to 0.6, OGD-scopy, no varices, no ascites. She's now 3 years. So we avoided hepatic transplant. But the only other thing is that you have to keep them on warfarin because it's a low flow situation. So you have to keep them on a lifetime oral anticoagulation. I'm sure better things are yet coming. Thank you very much.
Okay, Dr. Mehta, thank you very much. That was a wonderful presentation. So this lady, let's just discuss this case briefly. So this lady is a case of cryptogenic hepatic cirrhosis, and it was realized later that it was due to the backflow from the tricuspid regurgitating hepatic valve that resulted in vascular congestion and cirrhosis as a result of that. But you also mentioned that the patient had, in addition to tricuspid regurgitation, the patient also had mitral regurgitation.
So the mitral was not significant. We showed it to a surgeon.
Okay.
And he also felt even if the mitral is significant, he was not going to be touching it.
Right. So what was the reason for the tricuspid and regurgitation in the first place? So,
So we tried to get an MRI done. We really couldn't find any major evidence of restrictive cardiomyopathy. That's what we thought, whether there's any restrictive cardiomyopathy causing this. So effectively, we really did not get a real cause why she had so much severe TR. But I'm sure there was something to do with the myocardial problem only. It could be a restrictive cardiomyopathy. Although we couldn't get a good cardiac MR on her.
Okay. So how many cases have you done till date, and what is it?
I have done only one because the experience is very small.
Okay.
I think they have not done more than 5 or 6. They will probably company will tell you more. When I did it, that was the second one in India, and after that I heard 2 have been done more. So maybe they've done more after that.
Okay. So we have time for one question, Dr. Mehta. We are nearly we are running short of time. So there is one question by Dr. Moinak Mukhopadhyay, who is asking why the RA is not getting dilated after trach implantation. Logically, who does the systolic tear volume?
Right. So there's a good paper on this by Dr. Hans Fugula, who first did this case. So he has found that there is some amount of RA dilatation, but has not led to any consequences in the 1.5 year of his experience. And same is with our experience. Now she's not with us, she's in Kuwait. So there is RA dilatation, but there is no consequences that has come out of it. So we still don't know how this is going to behave in the very, very long term.
So, but it is early days. So
yeah, still early days.
Follow-up is for how long for this case?
So we have a follow-up of almost 2.5, 3 years. She's doing well, but she's not sent us an echo. But she's asymptomatic, so she's not swelling up.
Okay. Okay. So thank you very much, Dr. Mehta. I think with that we have to call an end to this session. Thank you.
Thank you for having me over.
And happy birthday to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And have a nice evening. Okay.
Thank you.
So we will close the session here. Thank you very much. And over to the organizers for the beginning of the next session.